The year was not far ahead of our own time when Earth finally received a signal that changed everything. For decades, people had dreamed about life beyond the stars, but no one truly believed the day would come so soon. The message didn't come as a sudden flash of light or a mysterious object in the sky. It arrived quietly, as a transmission through deep space channels that scientists had been monitoring for years. The signal carried a code, something far more complex than human technology could have made. It repeated over and over, almost like an invitation. At first, the world didn't know how to react. Governments argued about whether it was real or some clever prank. But the message kept coming stronger each time, and soon the truth could no longer be ignored. Humanity was being called to join something much larger, a council of intelligent civilizations that governed vast parts of the galaxy. They called it the Galactic Consul, a name that sounded like something out of a movie, yet it was completely real. After long debates, Earth accepted the invitation. A delegation was chosen: scientists, diplomats, thinkers, and a few military advisors. Among them was an elderly scientist who had spent his whole life studying cosmic signals and planetary behavior. He was quiet, humble, but deeply respected. No one expected that his voice would soon echo through galaxies. The day of departure was filled with both hope and fear. Across the planet, people watched the broadcast. The moment humans would finally step beyond the solar system, not just as explorers, but as equals among galactic civilizations. Families gathered in homes, children waved flags, and for a short time, the world felt united. No wars, no arguments, just one dream, that humanity would finally belong to something greater. When the human ship arrived at the council station, everyone was struck silent. The place was massive, a floating city made of shining metal and energy, orbiting a star that glowed like a living diamond. Hundreds of species lived and worked there. Some looked strange to human eyes, but their movements showed intelligence, order, and grace. It felt like walking into the future. The humans were greeted by the Galactic Consul, a tall being with shimmering skin that reflected light like glass. His presence filled the chamber with authority. Around him sat other council members, each representing a different world. Their technology, their elegance, their calm composure made the human visitors feel small, like children standing in front of ancient gods. At first, the consul welcomed Earth. His voice was calm, his tone polite. He spoke of unity and peace among civilizations. But as the meeting went on, the atmosphere slowly changed. The council began discussing the status of Earth, its wars, its pollution, its slow progress. They spoke as though Earth were a problem to be managed, not a partner to be respected. One of the council members even suggested that Earth should surrender control over some of its natural resources for universal balance. They said humanity was not responsible enough to manage its own planet. Those words struck hard. The human delegation sat in silence, unsure whether to respond or to wait. Cameras from across galaxies recorded every second. Billions were watching. The consul smiled, but his words carried arrogance. He said Earth was still a young world, too emotional, too unpredictable. He compared humans to children playing with fire, dangerous and fragile at the same time. The insult was clear, though spoken in calm, diplomatic tones. The room fell quiet. The representatives from Earth looked down, uncomfortable. Some wanted to respond, but others feared making things worse. Then slowly, the elderly scientist stood up. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were firm. Everyone turned toward him, expecting a formal apology or a scientific comment. But instead, he spoke with a steady human tone that carried the weight of centuries of struggle. He said, "You speak of us as if we are reckless children, but you forget we have learned everything the hard way. We have suffered through war, hunger, disease, and loss. Yet here we stand, still reaching for the stars." The consul's expression didn't change. He watched silently, his glowing eyes fixed on the human who dared to speak without permission. The scientist continued, "We make mistakes, yes, but every mistake teaches us. Every fall makes us rise stronger. You ask us to hand over our world, our resources, as if we have no right to exist on our own terms. But Earth is not just a planet. It is our home, our history, our soul." The chamber grew tense. Even the translators paused, unsure if they should continue. No one had ever spoken to the council like this before. Not a new species. Certainly not one so young in the galactic timeline. He took a breath and said, "If you truly seek peace, then meet us as equals. But if you come to rule us, then you will see a side of humanity you cannot understand. We may fight among ourselves, but when someone threatens our home, we become one." There was silence. You could almost feel the energy shift in the room. The council members exchanged looks. Some seemed curious. Others looked displeased. The consul finally leaned forward and said, "Is that a threat, human?" The scientist's voice remained calm. "No, it's a warning. Do not mistake our silence for weakness. Humanity may be young, but we are not afraid." Those words echoed through the great chamber. The translators repeated them in dozens of alien languages. Across the galaxy, those watching the broadcast felt something. A kind of admiration, or maybe curiosity, about this fragile world that dared to speak with such courage. The consul smiled faintly, but the arrogance in his eyes faded. He waved his hand, signaling the meeting to continue. Yet nothing was quite the same after that. The humans had not bowed. They had not begged. They had stood with dignity. When the meeting ended, the human delegation returned to their quarters. No one spoke for a while. They all knew that what had just happened could change everything. Some feared the council's anger. Others felt proud. But deep down, they all understood that something powerful had begun. A shift in how the universe saw Earth. Back on Earth, the transmission of that meeting spread faster than anyone expected. People watched the footage again and again, the moment one human stood up to defend the entire planet. Social media, news channels, and even street conversations buzzed with the same words: "Do not mess with Earth." For once, the world felt united. People didn't care about borders or politics. They cared about what that man had said, that humans might be flawed, but they never give up. It wasn't just pride. It was a reminder of who they were. In classrooms, teachers replayed the clip to inspire students. In factories, workers stood a little taller. In homes, parents told their children that courage doesn't always come from power. Sometimes it comes from standing up for what is right, even when you stand alone, far away. On the council station, the consul reviewed the recordings. His advisors whispered that perhaps Earth should be handled carefully. They had seen many worlds rise and fall, but something about humans felt different. Their defiance wasn't built on arrogance, but on spirit. As the ship carrying the human delegation prepared to return home, the elderly scientist stood by the observation window, watching the stars drift by. One of his colleagues asked if he was afraid that they might have made things worse. He smiled softly and said, "Maybe, but if we don't speak for ourselves, no one ever will." Outside, the endless stars shined quietly, as if listening. No one knew what would come next and whether the council would welcome Earth or challenge it. But for now, humanity had spoken clearly. They would not kneel. They would not surrender their right to exist freely. And somewhere deep within that vast, silent universe, a new respect for Earth had begun to form. Fragile, uncertain, but very real. That moment, that single warning, would later be remembered as the turning point when humanity stopped being seen as a small, unstable race and started being recognized as something far more powerful, a people with unbreakable will. When the human delegation returned from the Galactic Council, the whole world was still talking about what had happened. Every news channel replayed the moment when the old scientist stood up and told the council, "Do not mistake our silence for weakness." Those words had spread across the planet like fire. People called it the speech that changed humanity's place in the universe. For the first time in history, Earth was being talked about not as a troubled world, but as a proud one. Even countries that had long argued with each other now found a common feeling of pride. It was strange but beautiful, how one person's courage could make billions stand a little taller. Yet beneath all that pride, there was also fear. The Galactic Consul had smiled at the end of the meeting, but his silence afterward felt heavy. No one knew what that silence meant. Was it respect? Or was it anger? The scientists who monitored deep space communication began noticing strange signals, faint encrypted messages from the Council's fleets. They didn't look threatening, but they didn't look peaceful either. Earth's leaders gathered in secret meetings. They debated day and night. Some wanted to send another message to the Council, to apologize and smooth things over. Others argued that Earth should stand firm. "If we bend now," one leader said, "they'll never see us as equals." But fear still lingered in the air. Humanity had finally spoken up, but would the universe punish them for it? Meanwhile, the elderly scientist who had spoken at the council became a symbol of courage. Everywhere he went, people stopped to thank him. Schools taught his speech as a moment of history, but he didn't enjoy the attention. He knew the danger that might come next. He often said quietly to his colleagues, "Words can open doors, but they can also start storms." A few weeks later, the council sent another message to Earth. It was brief and formal, requesting another meeting, this time to clarify misunderstandings and define terms of cooperation. The wording sounded polite, but everyone could feel the tension hidden beneath it. Earth accepted. Another delegation was prepared, and once again the elderly scientist was asked to join. He hesitated at first, but he agreed. "I started this," he said, "so I must see it through." The journey back to the council station felt different this time. The first time there had been excitement and hope. Now there was uncertainty. The crew didn't talk much. They just looked out at the stars, each lost in thought. The stars were the same as before, and calm and endless. But now they seemed to hold questions instead of dreams. When the ship arrived, the council station looked as grand as ever, but something about it felt colder. Security ships surrounded it. The atmosphere was tense even before the humans set foot inside. When they entered the main chamber, the consul was already waiting. His face showed no expression. "Welcome back, representatives of Earth," he said. "We trust your journey was comfortable." The scientist bowed slightly. "It was. We thank you for allowing us to return." The consul nodded and continued. "There are matters that must be addressed. Your last statement has caused curiosity and concern among the council worlds." The scientist remained calm. "I understand. My words were not meant as a threat." "Perhaps not," the consul replied. "But many perceived them as such. You must understand, most young species approach us with gratitude, not defiance. It is unusual to see a developing world speak of equality." The scientist took a breath. "We seek peace and cooperation, but peace cannot exist where one side must kneel." A soft murmur spread through the chamber. The council members exchanged glances, some curious, others visibly irritated. The consul leaned back, studying the humans. "You speak with confidence," he said, "but confidence can be dangerous without strength." The scientist met his gaze. "Strength is not only about power, it's about spirit. You may have greater technology, but humanity has something you cannot measure: the will to survive." The consul tilted his head slightly. "Is that another warning?" "It's a truth," the scientist replied quietly. "Our planet may be small, our people may argue and fight, but when it truly matters, we stand together. That is something no weapon can replace." The consul looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Perhaps. But unity is easy to speak of and hard to prove. If humanity truly stands together, the council will see it soon enough." The meeting ended there without any clear agreement. The humans left the chamber uneasy. They couldn't tell if they had been threatened or simply tested. When they returned to the ship, the scientist looked out through the window at the stars again. "They don't believe us," he said softly. "They think we'll break apart under pressure." A younger diplomat asked, "Do you think they'll test us?" He nodded. "Yes, that's how powerful empires work. They test before they trust." Back on Earth, the response to the meeting was mixed. Some people celebrated it as another victory, a sign that humanity was holding its ground. Others were worried. News networks showed analysis after analysis, trying to guess what the council would do next. Governments quietly began working on defense systems. Scientists collaborated across nations, building new satellite shields, energy detectors, and early warning systems. For the first time, countries that used to compete started sharing technology. A strange unity began to form. It wasn't perfect. There were still arguments, mistrust, and political games. But there was also something new in the air: a shared determination to protect Earth. The elderly scientist continued to speak calmly on television, encouraging people to stay hopeful but prepared. "Peace is always worth trying for," he said, "but peace without dignity is not peace at all." His words struck a chord with millions. Days turned into weeks, and the signals from the council continued, small, coded messages that no one could fully interpret. Some said they were harmless. Others feared they were gathering data about Earth. Then one morning, Observatories picked up something new: movement at the edge of the solar system. It wasn't an invasion, just a fleet of council ships entering the system. They didn't approach Earth directly. They simply stopped near the outer planets watching. The council later sent a message saying it was a routine survey mission. But people weren't fooled. They knew it was a test exactly as the scientist had predicted. Panic didn't break out, though. Instead, Earth reacted with quiet strength. The United Space Command coordinated with scientists around the globe. Satellites formed a defensive ring. Communications stayed open but cautious. The world didn't threaten war, but it didn't show fear either. The elderly scientist was invited to a global broadcast to speak again. Millions tuned in. He looked tired but calm, sitting in front of the camera with the same steady eyes that had once faced the consul. He said, "We have visitors watching us right now. They want to see what kind of people we are, whether we crumble or stand firm. So let's show them who we truly are, not through weapons, but through unity, discipline, and courage. The galaxy will not respect us for our power, but for our heart." Those words resonated deeply. Around the world, people took them to heart. Scientists worked late into the night. Families hung Earth flags outside their homes. It wasn't about nationalism anymore. It was about survival with dignity. A few days later, one of the council ships sent a message directly to Earth's main station. It said only one thing: "We are observing." That single line sent chills through everyone who read it. It meant the test had begun. But this time humanity didn't panic. The elderly scientist simply said, "Then let them observe. They'll see what it means to be human." Weeks passed. The council ship stayed silent. They didn't attack, they didn't interfere, they just watched. During that time, Earth showed the best of itself. No riots, no chaos, no surrender. People worked together like never before. Aid was sent where it was needed. Technology was shared across borders. The world seemed to remember what unity felt like. Then one day, as suddenly as they had come, the council ships disappeared. They left no message, no trace, just silence. The observatories confirmed it. The sky was clear again. Humanity had passed the test without firing a single shot. In a quiet moment, the elderly scientist sat on a bench outside the global headquarters, watching the sunrise. Reporters rushed toward him, asking what he thought it meant. He simply smiled and said, "It means they were listening." No one knew exactly what the council would decide next. But deep down, everyone sensed that something had changed. The galaxy had seen what Earth truly was. Not perfect, not peaceful all the time, but strong in its unity and heart. The scientist looked up at the sky and whispered softly, "We warned them once. Now they understand why." Weeks had passed since the Council's mysterious ships vanished from the edge of the solar system. Earth's skies were calm again, but something inside humanity had changed forever. People didn't see themselves as separate nations anymore. They had faced the galaxy together and won respect not through war but through unity. The news of the ships leaving spread across every country. People gathered in streets cheering not because they had defeated anyone, but because they had held their ground with dignity. Scientists and soldiers, children and teachers, all felt that they had been part of something historic. It was the first time in centuries that Earth had felt like one family. Still, there was quiet unease behind the celebration. Everyone knew the council wasn't finished. They hadn't sent those ships just to look. They were studying, observing, calculating. The old scientist knew it too. Whenever someone congratulated him, he would smile politely but say, "The real test hasn't come yet." He spent his days back in the research center, surrounded by younger scientists who looked up to him like a mentor. They were building new systems, communication links, defense grids, even peaceful exploration drones that could travel beyond the solar system. It wasn't about preparing for war. It was about proving that humanity could stand beside the Council as equals, not as dependents. One night, while he was working alone, a message appeared on his screen, a private encrypted transmission. The source was unknown, but the language was the same as the Council's digital patterns. The message said only, "We are watching. Your resolve interests us." He stared at those words for a long time. Then he smiled faintly and whispered, "Then keep watching." The next morning he shared the message with world leaders. It sparked long debates. Some wanted to reply immediately, showing goodwill. Others said to stay silent, to avoid showing weakness. Finally, the scientist advised, Sometimes silence is the strongest answer. Let our actions speak, and that's exactly what humanity did. Instead of rushing into another negotiation, Earth began to show progress. Countries collaborated on projects that had once seemed impossible, building clean energy stations, expanding space research, and even planning the first United Space City. The media called it the Age of Earth Rising. People were working harder than ever, not out of fear but out of pride. They wanted to show the universe that humans could be responsible, creative, and peaceful without being controlled. Artists painted murals of the Earth surrounded by stars, and children in schools learned about the speech that had inspired the change. Do not mistake our silence for weakness. Those words had become more than a line. They were a reminder of what humans stood for. Meanwhile, far away in the great chambers of the Galactic Council, discussions about Earth continued. Some members admired humanity's courage and quick progress. Others still saw them as reckless. The Consul listened quietly as arguments went back and forth. They are impulsive, one alien ambassador said. They act without full understanding of consequences. Another countered, perhaps, but they adapt faster than any species we've met. The Consul raised a hand for silence. They are unpredictable, he said, his voice echoing across the chamber. And that makes them dangerous but also interesting. He looked at the data on his screen. Images of Earth's new achievements, energy grids, environmental recovery, and social unity. They have changed more in months than some worlds do in centuries, he added. Perhaps it is time we understand them, not just judge them. A few weeks later, a new signal reached Earth. This time, it wasn't cold or threatening. It was an invitation. The Council requested another meeting, not to warn but to discuss future cooperation and understanding. When the message appeared on screens around the world, people felt mixed emotions. Some were cautious, remembering the arrogance of the first meeting. Others were hopeful, seeing it as a chance for peace. The old scientist was once again chosen to represent Earth. Before he left, he gave a short speech that was broadcast worldwide. Standing before the cameras, he said, "We are not meeting them as servants or as challengers. We go as partners in peace, strong, humble, and united. No matter what happens, remember, humanity stands together." The world watched as the ship lifted off once more, heading toward the Council's great station. This time, the scientist didn't feel nervous. He felt ready. When they arrived, the reception was very different from before. There were no armed guards, no distant stares. Instead, Council members greeted them with polite gestures and respectful silence. The Consul himself came forward and said, "Welcome back, representatives of Earth. The galaxy has watched your progress. You have surprised us." The scientist bowed slightly. "We only did what we should have done long ago, work together." The Consul motioned for them to follow. As they walked through the vast hall filled with shimmering lights and alien architecture, the Consul said quietly, "Your planet has changed quickly. Many of us did not believe you capable of such unity." The scientist smiled. "We didn't believe it either until we had to. Sometimes it takes an outside challenge to remind us who we are." The Consul paused, then asked, "Tell me, human, why did you speak those words that day? You could have stayed silent, avoided conflict." The scientist looked at him calmly. "Because silence before injustice is not peace. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned on both sides." The Consul nodded slowly, as if trying to understand something deeper. "You spoke like one who has seen much pain." "I have," the scientist said softly. "I've seen what humans can do when they lose hope. I've also seen what they become when they find courage. We may fall many times, but we always rise. That's our story." The chamber fell silent for a moment. The Consul looked thoughtful. Then he said, "Perhaps the universe has underestimated you." As the meeting continued, both sides began to talk openly. The Council shared knowledge about interstellar travel and universal energy systems. The humans, in turn, shared ideas about creativity, emotion, and the importance of free will. Concepts the Council had nearly forgotten after thousands of years of order. It was strange. Two very different civilizations trying to understand each other. But slowly a bridge was being built. When the meeting ended, the Consul stood and said, "You have reminded us of something we had forgotten. The strength of a heart that refuses to give up. Maybe that is why your world has drawn our attention." The scientist replied gently, "Every world has something to teach, even a small one like ours." Before leaving, the consul said one final thing. "Your warning still echoes through this hall." It was bold, but perhaps it was necessary. The scientist smiled slightly. It wasn't a warning. It was a reminder that peace must be mutual, or it is nothing. When the human delegation returned to Earth, they brought more than new knowledge. They brought hope, the beginning of mutual respect. The media called it the turning point. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was the moment the galaxy began to see Earth differently. In the days that followed, the world continued to grow stronger. Space programs expanded, and students across the globe dreamed of becoming explorers and ambassadors. The old scientist became a quiet hero. He didn't give speeches anymore. He just kept working, often watching the stars from his small observatory. One night, as he looked up at the sky, he received a final transmission, short and simple. It read, "Respect earned. The Council acknowledges Earth as a sovereign world." He read it twice, barely believing it. Then he sat back, closed his eyes, and smiled. The next morning, that message reached every screen on the planet. Crowds gathered in the streets again, cheering, crying, and hugging one another. There were no national flags this time, only one flag, the blue and white image of Earth. People realized that the journey wasn't about winning against the galaxy. It was about proving who they were, to others and to themselves. As the scientist watched the celebrations from his window, he whispered quietly, "We warned them not because we wanted war, but because we wanted peace with dignity, and now they understand." Outside, the morning light touched the horizon. The Earth looked peaceful, strong, and proud, no longer a small world lost among stars, but a home that had finally earned its place in the universe. And far away, somewhere beyond the reach of human eyes, the Galactic Council looked toward Earth, not with judgment but with respect. The story of the human who dared to speak had changed everything. The universe would never see Earth the same way again. Months had passed since the message from the Galactic Council arrived, confirming Earth as a sovereign world. The words sounded official, but for the people of Earth, it meant something far deeper. They had finally been recognized as equals among the stars. The planet was no longer a place struggling for survival. It had become a symbol of determination. Every street, every classroom, every home carried a quiet sense of pride. People didn't just look at the night sky with curiosity anymore. They looked with belonging. The stars weren't distant strangers now. They felt like neighbors. The old scientist, whose speech had sparked this change, had become a quiet legend. Schools taught his words, but he avoided the spotlight. He often said, "It was not my voice that changed things. It was the spirit of humanity that answered through me." He spent most of his days working with young researchers, teaching them about unity, science, and humility. Earth had entered what people started calling the Age of Cooperation. Nations no longer competed for dominance. Instead, they competed to do good. Space agencies from every continent joined hands to create the first United Space Network, a project that aimed to connect Earth with distant colonies and even the Galactic Council's trade routes. It was not about control but connection. Factories once used for weapons were now building advanced spacecrafts. Farms used clean energy systems developed through global cooperation. The planet's climate began to heal faster than expected. Humanity was finally learning to take care of its home, just as it prepared to explore beyond it. One evening, as the old scientist sat on his balcony watching the sunset, he received a message from the United Earth Assembly. They wanted him to lead the next mission, a diplomatic journey to another council world. This mission would be the first time humans stepped onto another civilization's planet as guests, not as students or inferiors, but as equals. He hesitated at first. "My time should belong to the new generation," he said. But the assembly insisted. "You were the voice that made the universe listen. You must be the one to take the first step forward." After much thought, he agreed. "I will go," he said softly, "but not as a hero. I'll go as a human, one of many." The preparations for the mission took months. The ship was built with a blend of human and council technology, a symbol of peace and unity. It was sleek, silver, and graceful, unlike any craft Earth had built before. People from all over the world gathered to watch its launch. Children waved flags, families cheered, and news reporters described it as the most important journey since the dawn of humanity. As the ship rose into the sky, the scientist watched through the window, feeling both pride and responsibility. "We're not just carrying science," he said to the crew. "We're carrying the story of who we are." After several days of travel through interstellar routes, the ship reached its destination, a world called Narration, one of the oldest members of the Galactic Council. The planet was breathtaking. Its oceans shimmered with colors that changed with the wind, and its cities floated gently above the clouds, glowing like soft lanterns. When the humans stepped out, they were greeted not by soldiers or guards, but by a group of peaceful beings, and tall, calm, and gentle in their movements. The leader of the welcoming party bowed slightly and said, "Welcome, children of Earth. Your courage has reached far corners of our galaxy." The scientist returned the bow. "We come in peace and with gratitude." The delegation was guided through the city. Everywhere they went, they saw advanced technology working in harmony with nature. The air was clean, the water pure, and the people seemed to live without greed or fear. For the humans, it was both inspiring and humbling. Later that day, the delegation was invited to a gathering of scholars and leaders. The discussions were open and respectful. The council members asked how Earth had achieved such rapid recovery after centuries of division. The scientist answered honestly, "We found unity not through power but through fear of losing everything. When we realized that survival depended on each other, we learned to cooperate. Maybe it's something every world must discover in its own way." The scholars nodded in understanding. One of them said, "Perhaps that is why your world has been chosen to remind us of what we once forgot." That night, the humans were invited to a ceremony held in honor of Earth's new membership. The hall was filled with light and sound that seemed alive. The consul himself appeared through a holographic connection. He looked at the scientist and said, "Earth has proven that strength is not measured by technology but by the heart. You have earned our respect." The scientist replied humbly, "Respect means nothing unless it's mutual. We still have much to learn, and we hope to learn together." As the ceremony ended, he felt a quiet peace in his heart. Humanity had taken another step, not through conquest but through understanding. When the delegation returned to Earth, the world erupted in joy. The images of alien cities and new friends filled every screen. It felt like humanity had finally become part of something bigger, a galaxy that no longer saw them as strangers. But amid the celebration, the scientist remained cautious. He knew peace was fragile. In private meetings, he reminded world leaders, "The moment we grow arrogant, we will lose everything we've gained. The galaxy respects us now, but it will also watch us. Let's make sure we stay worthy of that respect." Under his guidance, the United Space Network grew stronger. Space stations were built across the solar system, not military outposts, but research centers focused on learning and exploration. Young scientists worked side by side with alien researchers, sharing knowledge freely. Earth's culture also began to change. Music, art, and literature were inspired by the stories of intergalactic friendship. The idea of us versus them slowly faded. People started to say, "We are all part of the same sky." Still, in quiet corners of the council, not everyone was happy about Earth's rise. Some old members feared humanity's growing influence. They whispered among themselves that Earth's emotions, its unpredictability, could one day disturb the galaxy's balance. The consul knew of these whispers, but he said nothing. He had seen something in the humans that even the most advanced species lacked. A spark, a passion that turned weakness into strength. One evening, as he stood in his chamber looking at a projection of Earth, he said to his advisor, "They are dangerous. Yes, but not because they seek war. They are dangerous because they inspire others to change." Back on Earth, the scientist continued his quiet work. He often visited schools talking to young minds about peace, knowledge, and courage. He told them, "The stars will test you, but never forget, you are human. That means you can rise from anything." Years passed, and the bond between Earth and the Council deepened. Trade, research, and communication flourished. Humanity had earned a seat not just in the Council chambers, but in the hearts of other worlds. One night, as the scientist walked alone under the stars, he looked up and smiled. The same stars that had once felt distant now felt like old friends. He thought about how far they had come, from being mocked as a primitive race to standing among galactic powers with respect and pride. He whispered to himself, It started with a warning, but it ended with understanding. That's what it means to be human. And somewhere beyond those shining stars, the consul watched the same sky, thinking the same thing, that sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest truths. Years had passed since Earth became part of the Galactic Consul. The world had changed in ways that no one could have imagined. Cities floated above oceans powered by clean energy drawn directly from sunlight and gravity. Diseases that once terrified humanity had been cured. Poverty was nearly gone. For the first time in history, humans were not fighting each other. They were united under one sky. One purpose, but deep in the universe, something was changing. The Galactic Council, once a symbol of peace and unity, had begun to show cracks. Disagreements that were once small had turned into bitter debates. Some powerful worlds believed the Council had become too lenient, too dependent on compromise. Others feared that the growing friendship between Earth and the Council was creating imbalance. Whispers began to spread that Earth's influence was reshaping galactic politics. Some even claimed that humans, though new to the stars, were already changing the old order. The old scientist, now with gray hair and calm eyes, could feel it. From his observatory on the moon, he watched the Council transmissions, noticing the tension behind polite speeches. He often told his students, peace is not a gift. It's something you must rebuild every day. One night, while studying the data coming from the Council's central hub, he noticed something strange. Unusual movement from the fleets of a powerful world called Veltron. Officially, Veltron was part of the Council's peace alliance, but their ships were moving toward disputed territories. The scientist immediately sent a message to the United Earth Assembly. Something is stirring, he warned. We need to stay calm but alert. Within days, his fears came true. Reports arrived of a confrontation near the border of the Council's space. Veltron ships had surrounded a smaller world, demanding control of its resources. The Council called an emergency meeting. Every member watched as the Veltron representative spoke with cold confidence. The Council is weak, he said. We've spent centuries talking about unity, while the galaxy grows restless. Earth's ideals have blinded you all. You have forgotten strength. The room fell silent. The consul looked disturbed but calm. Strength without wisdom leads only to destruction, he replied. But the Veltron envoy laughed. Then destruction is what will remind this galaxy who truly leads. The transmission ended. Within hours, the first shots were fired. A war that no one wanted had begun. Back on Earth, panic spread quickly. People feared that the fragile peace they had built would collapse. The scientist was called to lead a special council meeting. His voice, though old, was steady. We will not join their war, he said, but we cannot stand aside and let chaos spread. We must be the calm between storms. Earth immediately opened its communication channels to both sides, offering to mediate. But Veltron refused to listen. Their fleets were too powerful, their pride too deep. They believed they could crush opposition in weeks. The consul reached out to the scientist personally. His voice came through the holographic link filled with exhaustion. Your people once warned us not to test Earth's patience. Now I ask you, help us remind them of peace before it's too late. The scientist nodded slowly. We will try, but remember, peace needs both sides to listen. Over the next few weeks, Earth became the center of desperate diplomacy. Messages, holograms, and envoys filled the skies. Every attempt at negotiation failed. Veltron's armies pushed deeper into Council territory. Refugees fled to neutral worlds. The galaxy that once looked united now seemed divided. Again. The old scientist realized something painful, so no amount of technology or intelligence could save the galaxy if hearts were ruled by pride. He decided to do something that shocked everyone. Without waiting for approval, he took a small ship and traveled toward the conflict zone himself. When his crew asked why, he answered quietly, "Sometimes you need to stand where the fire burns to remind others of what's worth saving." As his ship entered the war zone, he sent an open broadcast across all frequencies. His voice reached every ship, every station, every leader, both human and alien. "This is a human transmission," he began. "Years ago, we were warned by the Council not to destroy ourselves. We listened. We changed. And now I ask you to listen. You call this war strength? It's not strength. It's fear pretending to be power. If the galaxy falls apart now, no one wins. Not Veltron, not the Council, not us. We'll all lose the one thing we fought to build, peace." His words echoed across the stars. Even in the chaos of battle, ships paused to listen. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. The firing stopped. The galaxy held its breath. But then, one of Veltron's commanders gave the order to continue. Their pride wouldn't allow surrender. The scientist didn't retreat. He kept his ship between the two fleets, refusing to move. His message continued. If you destroy this piece, remember, history will not honor those who burned it. It will honor those who tried to save it. Finally, a miracle happened. The consul himself appeared on all galactic channels, speaking directly to Veltron's High Council. If Earth's people who were once divided can find peace, then why can't we? Let us prove that wisdom can still lead where war cannot. The galaxy watched as hours turned into days of silent tension. Negotiations began again, this time with Earth as the mediator. It took weeks of long talks, sacrifices, and trust, but the fighting slowly stopped. Veltron finally agreed to a peace agreement, though their pride still burned. They withdrew their fleets and the Council restored balance. When the scientist returned to Earth, he was greeted not with celebration, but with quiet respect. The people understood that what he had done was not victory, it was survival of hope. In a speech to the United Earth Assembly, he said softly, "War is never truly over. It hides in pride and fear and silence. The only weapon that can defeat it is understanding." The audience sat in silence, many holding back tears. The scientist looked out at them, humans and aliens sitting side by side, and smiled faintly. "We once warned the Council not to mess with Earth, but maybe the real warning was meant for us, to never mess with the peace we worked so hard to earn." In the months that followed, Earth's influence grew even more, but not because of power or fear. Other worlds began following their example of unity and calm leadership. They saw humanity as the reminder that progress meant nothing without compassion. The consul often told his advisors, "The humans may be young, but they are the teachers now." On quiet nights, the old scientist would sit by his window, looking at the sky filled with thousands of lights, human ships, council transports, and stars stretching into forever. He would think about how it all began, a warning, spoken not with anger but with courage. He would whisper to himself, "We didn't win a war. We won a chance to stay human in a galaxy that almost forgot what that means." And in that simple thought lay the truth that had guided humanity all along, that strength was not about control, but about choosing peace even when war seemed easier. Years had passed since the great galactic war was stopped through Earth's courage and the wisdom of its people. The galaxy had begun to heal slowly but surely. Trade routes reopened, worlds rebuilt what they had lost, and trust started to return among species that once looked at each other with suspicion. Earth was no longer a planet searching for acceptance. It had become a symbol, a reminder that even the smallest world could carry the biggest heart. People from faraway planets often said, "When hope dies, look toward Earth." Those words alone showed how far humanity had come. The old scientist had grown very weak by now. His hair was white, his face lined with age, and his voice softer than before. But his eyes still carried the same spark, that calm strength that had once silenced entire councils. He spent his days at a quiet research base near the mountains, surrounded by students and young scientists who admired him deeply. He never called himself a hero. When people tried to thank him, he would smile and say, "Don't thank me. Thank the millions who believed that peace was worth the struggle." He often walked outside at night looking up at the stars. Each one reminded him of the countless worlds now connected by peace treaties, trade, and friendship. But he knew that peace was never a final chapter. It was something that needed to be guarded every single day. One evening, while he was reading old transmissions, his assistant brought him a message. It was from the Galactic Consul. They wanted him to attend a special ceremony, not to honor war or victory, but to celebrate the century of peace. The Council had chosen Earth as the official host world for this historic gathering. The news spread across the galaxy like sunlight breaking through clouds. Billions of beings prepared to travel to Earth to witness the event. The streets filled with joy, decorations, and light. For the first time, alien ships landed freely across Earth's continents, not as visitors but as friends. The scientist, though too old to travel far, agreed to attend. "If this is the beginning of something new," he said gently, "then I want to see it with my own eyes." On the day of the ceremony, the Great Hall in the United Earth Assembly was filled with life. Delegates from hundreds of worlds sat together, beings of all colors, shapes, and sizes. The room glowed softly, filled with the sound of peaceful murmurs and laughter. When the consul entered, the hall fell silent. He walked toward the center and turned to the crowd. 100 years ago, he began, we were divided by fear. We saw each other as threats, not allies. Then came a voice, a human voice, that reminded us that peace begins when someone dares to speak truth. He looked toward the old scientist, who was sitting quietly in the front row. The consul raised his hand and said, "This man warned us once, do not mess with Earth." But what he truly meant was, do not underestimate the heart of those who seek peace. The hall erupted in applause. The sound was not loud or chaotic, it was warm, almost like the sound of rain. The scientist stood slowly, supported by his assistant. He looked around, smiling softly, his eyes shining with tears. When the applause faded, he spoke. His voice was faint, but every word carried weight. "I am just one man," he said. "But today I see what we all dreamed of. A galaxy where fear no longer decides our fate. When I was young, we used to look up at the stars and wonder if we were alone. Now I know the truth, that we were never alone. We just needed to learn how to listen." He paused, looking at the faces before him. Humans, aliens, beings of every kind, all united by hope. "Peace is not built by power," he continued. "It is built by understanding. Every mistake, every scar, every tear taught us something. And that's what made us strong. Remember this, the universe doesn't need rulers. It needs caretakers." The hall fell completely silent. Many delegates, even the consul himself, had tears in their eyes. The old scientist slowly stepped back and sat down, his speech done. After the ceremony, people from every world wanted to meet him, shake his hand, thank him for his wisdom. But he quietly slipped away, choosing to spend his last evening by the shore near his old home. The sea was calm and the stars shimmered above, reflected in the water like jewels scattered across glass. He sat there alone, listening to the gentle sound of waves. He remembered the early days, when humans were still fighting each other, when the council mocked Earth when everything seemed impossible. He smiled faintly and whispered, "We made it." He closed his eyes, feeling the cool wind on his face, and for the first time in many years he felt completely at peace. The next morning when the sun rose, his assistant found him still sitting there, calm, smiling, and gone. The news of his passing spread quickly across the galaxy, but it wasn't met with sadness alone, and it was met with gratitude. Every world held a moment of silence, not just to mourn him, but to honor the idea he represented. The Galactic Council declared that day as Human Unity Day, a day when all species would pause, reflect, and renew their promise of peace. Across the stars, monuments were built not to show power, but to remind everyone that even one person's words can change the destiny of worlds. On Earth, the old scientist's home was turned into a memorial garden. People visited from every corner of the planet and beyond. They didn't bring flowers or gifts, they brought stories. Stories of how his message had touched their lives. Children would sit near the shore listening to elders tell the tale of the man who once stood against the galaxy's pride and spoke for peace. Years passed. Technology advanced even further. Humans began to explore galaxies beyond the Council's reach, but they never forgot where it all began. Every spacecraft that left Earth carried the same inscription: "Peace is our strength." The Consul, now much older himself, often visited Earth. He would walk through the memorial garden quietly, placing his hand on the stone where the scientist's final words were carved. "Do not mess with Earth, for it remembers who it is." He would smile and whisper, "You were right, old friend. You were always right." Over time, humans became known as the guardians of balance. Whenever two worlds began to argue or drift toward conflict, they would call for Earth's mediators, people trained not in warfare, but in empathy. Humanity had become what it once needed, a voice of reason among chaos. In schools across the galaxy, children learned about the history of Earth, not as conquerors, but as teachers. They learned how a species once divided by borders and ego found harmony through compassion. And though generations passed, the legend of that warning, "Do not mess with Earth," never faded. It was repeated not as a threat but as a reminder that Earth's true power was never in its weapons or technology, but in its unity, its courage, and its endless ability to forgive. One quiet evening, a group of young explorers stood on the same shore where the old scientist had spent his last night. They looked up at the sky, now filled with glowing ships, satellites, and distant worlds connected through light. One of them said softly, "Do you think we'll ever see someone like him again?" Another smiled. "Maybe not, but maybe that's the point. He didn't want to be remembered as a person. He wanted us to remember what it means to be human." The waves touched their feet, and they stood there in silence, knowing that somewhere beyond the stars the story of Earth was still being told, carried in whispers across the universe, because peace had not ended with one man's life. It had just begun.